Hello, everybody. So today I'm going to get into a couple of videos here talking about different conflicts of the Cold War, how the Cold War kind of got it set up to be fought, if you will, and just show you there's always kind of something going on. So right away, when we talk about fighting the Cold War, it was almost immediate because after the war, you had the dividing up of Germany, which if you look there, you'll see the Federal Republic of Germany, and you've got different French positions, and the U.S. is involved and stuff like that, right? And then the Russians have over here. So this isn't, it's a big deal, but it's not as dangerous. This is the dangerous part, because what you also had was the division of Berlin. And so half of Berlin was basically controlled by the Russians and the other half by the British, French, and the Americans. The Soviets don't like that in the least because they don't have any equivalent. And the Americans and the West would routinely use Berlin as this outpost of freedom deep into the territory behind the Iron Curtain, controlled by the Soviets. There's this bastion of freedom. And so in 1949, they make a big move. And what they decide to do is to blockade the city of Berlin, all roads, all railroads, anywhere in, to prevent supply of the city, with the hopes of getting the Americans and the British and the French out, and so that they could completely take over Berlin. All right. Well, what they weren't ready for was the response by the Americans primarily, which was the Berlin Airlift. And we are going to send thousands and thousands of flights with tons and tons of supplies. And it was incredibly tense because, man, if one of those planes got shot down, who knows what's going to happen? But they don't. And the Soviets will eventually back down. You see a picture of all these, kids in Germany, waving at the planes as they arrive. And then you got the one kid who's like, hey, there's a camera. I'm going to make sure I get the picture. Nobody else is looking. Well played, young man. But right away, within just a few years, you've got this tension. This happened in 1948 into 1949. And it always has this tenseness. It's like, okay, we're going to press the boundaries. Is something going to happen? Is something not going to happen? But right away, it showed you that there was going to be this anger, and each side was going to make these moves, and would someone flinch big time and escalate it to a quote-unquote hot war. So the big move becomes, in order to try to keep everything stable, if you will, you have the formation in a variety of different places in the world of defensive alliances. And the idea of these defensive alliances is, knowing full well that the US and USSR could erupt into war at any moment, the concept is that you have these big outward alliances. So if you make war on one country, you got to make war on a bunch of countries, and it's going to make you less apt to fight, which is actually why you're going to see, we're going to talk about Cold War conflicts and actual fighting, but none of that really happens in Europe particularly. So the Americans and the Western Europeans are going to form their defensive treaty, and that is NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, initially, the nations involved here are Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Great Britain, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and the United States. And this is an overt, very loud alliance. And the concept is that we are working together militarily, and we are military allies no matter what. And you have the one thing here, that an attack on one is an attack on all. So if you attack, say, little tiny Luxembourg, you have now declared war on the United States of America. And it's very blatant, and it's very forward, and it really establishes the tone for what this is all about. Okay, and there is the map of the original NATO nations. Okay, and their first leader, who was General Dwight Eisenhower from the United States. Today, it's much larger and includes many nations, that are in it here. And, it's pretty big, 28 nations involved. So very impressive organization. Now, the Soviets weren't just going to sit back and let that happen. They are going to answer with the Warsaw Pact. You actually see the flag of the Warsaw Pact on the left. And, of course, that will include East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Albania. Yugoslavia is communist, but they are not going to be involved here. Marshal Tito, their leader, is not having anything to do with the Russians. So they're going to be free of Russian control, but still under a dictator anyway, which results in all sorts of bad things later on. And this, again, is very blatant, very forward. And so while there's going to be lots of tension in Europe, outward, fighting is really not going to happen. And it's also a way to kind of keep chilling with the nukes, because U.S. has nukes, USSR have nukes, they threaten to bomb everybody. And so, in a way, these alliances keep everybody in check, which is, so for instance, if some of those alliances maybe were outward in World War I, maybe we don't get World War I. So something to think about. But we also had other areas of the world that were also forming alliances to mainly protect against communism's Soviet or Chinese incursion. One such example will be the South Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO. As you can see there, Australia, Burma, Cambodia, Canada, France. You can read. I won't insult you. You can read. So you see a large amount of nations that are involved in that there. And that really is a response to China and making sure that China does not expand. Now, some of these nations, as I mentioned before, are also still in the non-aligned movement, but this was mainly protection with China, which made it a little bit different. Then you also had one in Central Asia. This one was more or less against the Russians there, and that is the Central Treaty Organization, or CENTO, or sometimes better known as the Baghdad Pact. They have a little flag of their own as well, and that's Great Britain, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, and Turkey, really forming those alliances as well. And so the stage is kind of set. We have these outside alliances. And so what you're going to end up seeing is the progress of, so how do you fight this war? Sometimes it's just trying to get more nations to adopt communism and more nations to adopt capitalism. But in many cases, we're going to have a variety of fighting that occurs that I'll talk about some of them. I'm not going to talk about all of them because there's a lot of them. But we'll get into that in my next video. Just for now, we kind of see the stages set, understand where everybody's at, and then we'll get into the actual conflicts on how this Cold War is actually carried out. Because that's what it's all about. How will the United States and the Soviet Union dominate the world? And as you'll see, sometimes through fighting of their own, sometimes through supporting different sides of a conflict, and we'll see how that goes down. All right, so I'll talk to you guys soon. Enjoy.